Hi, Nancy. How are you doing?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good. That's okay. I saw you trying to get her.
Yeah.
Hi, Becky. Thanks for joining us. Also, Kristen, Hanks. How are you guys doing?
Doing great.
That's good to hear, Becky. Thanks.
I'm doing fine.
Good, good. Hi, Andrea and Irvin. How are you guys doing? Thanks for joining.
Thanks for being there.
Right. And I'm not ignoring you, Mac 112. I still know your name, so hi.
Change it.
That's fine. I just don't want you to think I don't care about you.
I got to figure out how to change it permanently.
So, all right, a few more people are still joining us here. Let everybody sort of try to get in, or the first wave, and we'll get started. So, all right, I'll call you Sue now instead of Mac. How's that sound? All right, I think a few more people will probably join us, but it looks like the wave is the first wave has started. So we'll go ahead and get started. So this class is the architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright, and we're going to use his UNESCO World Heritage Site structures to sort of guide our tour. And I'll explain what the UNESCO World Heritage Site is relative to Frank Lloyd Wright and everything else as we get started. So what I'd like to do is say a few words about myself and about Get Set Up and about the class. Then I'll turn it over to any of you that want to say a few words about yourself, maybe where you're from and what particular interest drove you to this class. If you want to share some. So that's where we'll go. So my name's Philip. Again, hi. John from Get Set Up is also with me. We'll be working behind the scenes, monitoring the chat and making sure everything's going fine electronically. So John will be there, and you can see he's written you a little chat note also. So again, I'm from Chicago. I give some Get Set Up classes about finances and things along the financial arena. And then I have a couple of classes about architecture. This one, and then one about Columbus, Indiana, which might be of interest to you also. So I am not an architect. I'm not an architectural historian. I'm just a layperson that enjoys architecture and living in Chicago, one of the great cities to do that in. I've lived here for about 25, 27 years and just sort of enjoy architecture. So I just want to make sure we all understand I don't have a formal or maybe even an informal background in architecture other than just a layman's appreciation for it. So as most of you know, most of you I think have been on Get Set Up before. Ideally, we learn from each other. So if you have the opportunity to share your screen, especially if you're going to ask some questions, whatever, that would be great. Understand that some days screen sharing is not the right thing to do. So that's fine if that's not the request. And all our Get Set Up classes are recorded primarily for training purposes. However, if you would like a copy of the recording, if you've registered for the class, you can get it. And the address is on the screen, and John's put it in the chat box also. So it's help@getsetup.io. So you can cut and paste it from the chat box if you like. And then if you're listening live through Get Set Up, you can get a copy of the class. If in the future you want to be involved in asking questions, etc., you can sign up through the Get Set Up portal and then be involved as what we call a live learner and be able to ask questions live as we go. We don't really talk about any products in this class generally, but in case we get a question or whatever, Get Set Up is not paid to promote any products, nor does Get Set Up get paid by any product for us to endorse them. So if any product does come up, it just comes up naturally, and there's no money going back or forth from that standpoint. So our goal today is talk a little about who is Frank Lloyd Wright. We'll talk a little bit about UNESCO World Heritage Sites. And then we're going to view some of his structures. And then we'll also talk a little bit about your interests in Frank Lloyd Wright. And so that's really the way I'd like to start. If any of you want to introduce yourself quickly and say a few words about how you got associated with taking this class, that would be great. Or if you want to put a few words about yourself in the chat box, whatever you're most comfortable with. And with that, I open it up to any of you.
Hi, I'm Becky. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Becky. Thanks for
Okay.
being first.
I'm in Florida. It's hotter than heck here today. But I was raised in West Virginia, so I visited Fallingwater, which is fantastic. That kind of sparked my interest initially. And I've also been to Chicago and took the train to his workshop. And that was fantastic too. So the more I can learn and see his other structures, the better. That's why I'm here.
What part of Florida do you live in, Becky?
Northeast, just north of Jacksonville, just below the Georgia line on the coast.
Okay. The reason why I asked that question, the largest concentration of Frank Lloyd Wright buildings in one location is at, I think it's Florida Southern, even though it's fairly north of, you're actually not too far from there. I think it's in Lakeland.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a little bit north of there.
And Nancy, I'm just south of you in St. Augustine.
All right. Very good.
So you might want to check out the campus there. I think it's Florida Southern, but it's got a very large group. It's got about 12 or 14 Wright design buildings. So if you're not aware of that, you're actually pretty close.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
So, all right. Anybody else want to say a few words?
Me.
Okay.
Can I?
Yes, please.
Can I? Oh, okay. I'm in Tampa, which is right by Florida Southern, which I've never been to, of course. And you can hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. And but I'm from Pittsburgh originally, so I've been to Fallingwater, and I tried to move in there, but they won't let me put my clothes in the cupboards and things like that. And I haven't been to Kentuck Knob, but I might go this summer. And I've been to Hyde Park in Chicago and took that tour, in Taliesin West and the Guggenheim. And I used to study like art history and architecture and all that. So yeah, I love all that,
Well, you've actually been to half of the 8 buildings we're going to talk about from what you
good.
said. So you're going to know some. So please chime in as we go through of anything you remember or you find of interest in regards to them. So that's good.
I've been to the one in Chicago.
Okay.
So well,
The Robie House or his home and studio?
the Robie House.
Okay. All right. That's going to be the second building we look at today. So good. All right. Anybody else have a few words they want to say? All right. Well, let's go ahead and we'll talk a little bit about Frank Lloyd Wright. So he's born in 1867 in Richland Center, Wisconsin. So for those that may not be real familiar with Wisconsin, it's in the southeast corner of the state, but generally it's a little north of Madison, which is due west of Milwaukee, just to get some reference. As we'll find out later, I think the third structure we're going to see is Taliesin, and it's in that area where he grew up. So we'll talk a little bit more about that at that time. So Wright is if you read anything he's written or you've seen some interviews, there's some interviews from him on TV and YouTube, etc. Is very educated, but he was not, or he sounds like he's very educated, and based on all the work he's done, obviously is, but it was very little formal education. There is no indication that he actually graduated from high school. And then he does get a special dispensation to attend the University of Wisconsin without having graduated from high school, but only attends for 2 semesters. He does study engineering while he is there, but for a very short period of time. And then he immediately, when he drops out of school, moves to Chicago. So back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, you didn't have to have an architectural degree. You didn't have to pass any test or anything. All you had to do was have somebody willing to give you some money to design a building. So Wright mentors with a couple of architects. The most popular and well-known of them is Louis Sullivan, of the firm of Adler and Sullivan in Chicago. And they were well known for building some high rises in Chicago after the Great Chicago Fire, and really helped with the building of Chicago in the 1890s. So Wright works very closely with Sullivan. They immediately hit it off, and Wright soon becomes what's called the head draftsman. So he's sort of in charge of all the other apprentices, so to speak, and the other people that aren't formally working as architects with the firm. And it seems like, the best I can tell, one thing, they had a great bond, and the thing that they seem to have, and obviously we're talking the 1890s, way before computers, obviously, but they both seem to have this ability to visualize in 3D these buildings that they were going to build. They could just visualize them and have them in great detail in their mind, and they could use that to then put pencil to paper, so to speak, and come up with this great design. So a lot of the big people that were asking for high rises also wanted some private residence built for them, or maybe big homes built for them. So Wright started doing that within working with Sullivan. Sullivan would still be the lead architect, but he would do that. And then when he goes off on his own, basically he does primarily residences, but he does do numerous buildings, commercial buildings, high rises, etc. But he's primarily known for residential houses. So next this is the view of the 8 buildings we're gonna spend a little more time on. These are all UNESCO World Heritage Sites. So UNESCO is part of the United Nations. It's their educational, cultural arm. And they have listed just under 1,200 structures across the world as UNESCO World Heritage Sites, which mean they have significant value to the overall culture and understanding of how we live. In 2019, what was titled the 20th Century Architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright was made to be a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And within that site are these 8 buildings that you see in front of us now. So it's considered one UNESCO World Heritage Site with 8 different buildings. So we're going to use those as the pivot on how we're going to look at the structures. These, I have them pictured in the order in which they were built, and they're built throughout his career, and is all the way up to the Guggenheim Museum, which is on the bottom right-hand corner. And those that really follow Wright closely know that he actually died while this building was being put together. It was mostly up but not fully completed. So Wright literally is an architect till the day he dies. He actually went into the hospital for some relatively, quote unquote, relatively minor stomach surgery. And then a couple of days later, an infection set in and he passed away. So he was still in good health overall when he does pass away. So the other thing about the UNESCO World Heritage Site, there's only 23 other UNESCO World Heritage Sites in the United States. So there's not that many of them. And half of them are actually natural sites, such as the Great Smoky Mountains, the Grand Canyon, Everglades National Park. So there's only 12 other buildings or set of buildings that are UNESCO World Heritage Sites in the United States. So a very esteemed honor that we have. So
do you
anyway,
include the Pope Leary House here in Alexandria, Virginia?
it is not. It's not one of the UNESCO.
Right. Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
All right. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the sites. So again, like I said, we'll go in the order of when they were completed. There'll be 1 or 2 exceptions, which we'll talk about as we get to them. So the first one is in Oak Park, Illinois, and a couple of you referenced that you went to his home and studio. So Wright, when he gets established in the Chicago area and builds his house, it is in Oak Park, which is the first immediate suburb west of Chicago. It borders Chicago. And that's where he builds his home. And then a few years later, attaches the studio to it when he gets to be more successful. So this is a Unitarian church called the Unity Temple. And this was actually the church that Wright and his family attended. In 1905, there was an existing structure there and it burnt to the ground from a fire. And Wright earns the commission to build the subsequent building. And so what we see in front of us now is the Unity Temple as it stands now, no changes to the outside. So it's rather unique. You might not even think it's a church to begin with. So part of the reason for this structure back in 1905 when he starts to design this, and still to this day in 2021, is right on the main street in Oak Park Avenue. And it was loud from my understanding, and I wasn't there in 1908, but I know it's loud now. And so what Wright does to try to make the church a little more private, as you can see, there are no windows where we would typically see them in the bottom part of the church. Yet he does want to have a lot of light inside. So he puts all the windows, as you can see, in the top of the church, and why this is rather unique. And it is in, we'll see in a minute, there's other parts to the building. Yeah, this is actually in Oak Park, Nancy. Hyde Park is part of Chicago, and that's where the next house is the Robie House, and that will be in Hyde Park. But this one is actually in Oak Park. So these are two different. Hyde Park is, for those not familiar, is actually just part of Chicago. Just there's like 50 different subsets. A separate city just west of Chicago. So as we go inside, this is a view from the pulpit, so to speak. So you can see, looking at the church, there actually is a lot of light inside. We'll see some skylights in a minute. But this is a view of the church. So you can see it's actually, it's not quite in the round, but people are sitting on three sides of the pulpit area. And you can see a couple of levels. One of the unique things about this church is no one congregant is more than about 45 feet away from the minister if he's talking immediately where the pulpit is. Another thing, even this is early in Wright's career, the church is considered to be significantly acoustical, and sometimes, especially pre-pandemic, this is a working church still a Unitarian church. It's a working church. You can tour it when services aren't going on. And also some evenings in the winter, they have a string quartet giving you some shows, and I've been to one of those shows, and indeed the acoustics are indeed very good. So the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust, which is based in Chicago, gives tours of this building if you're so interested. So here we can see again some of the skylights coming in to help bring light into the church, and we can see off on the left screen some of the Frank Lloyd Wright type of artificial light. As you can see, this is early in his career, but he already has a style sort of established in regards to the light that's in the church.
Philip, I'm not seeing this.
Okay, is everybody else seeing it?
Yeah, and Philip, do you mind going back to 2 slides?
Okay.
Yeah, I don't see it. I would like to see it, please.
Okay, and who's
I'm
next
speaking?
sharing your
slide back.
screen, but I'm only seeing you.
Okay, all right.
She probably needs help changing her view on
Yeah.
her computer.
Well, I know how to change my view, but I don't still see it.
Okay, and Teresa, she was on a class earlier today. You were seeing my screen earlier today, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, I want to see if you can communicate with John on chat and just see if he can help you. But I think everybody else is seeing it, Teresa. So is anybody,
Oh, okay.
just raise your hand if you can't.
Philip, do you mind going back one more slide?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
I can see it.
Okay, now I see it. Okay.
Perfect. All right, Melinda, do you have a question on this slide?
No, I just wanted to see it one more time. That's
Not a
beautiful.
problem. Not a problem. All right, so there's the light. So there is, so now this is from looking out in the congregate's view, so you can see where the minister is. You can see what it looks like in the background. So it's not your typical church altar, but it does have some of the common characteristics, and it is a very impressive church when you do go inside. And this also has a community space.
Wow.
So what Wright has done, if you look where my cursor is now, these are the front doors. So the main hallway divides the church from the community space. The church is back through this area back here where my cursor is now, gets you into the church part. And then the community center is on this side. So again, he's segregated the two areas rather distinctly, even though it's one building. So you can have church services going on or something within the church part of it, and also have the community area worked at the same time. So again, you can see a lot of the skylights, a lot of the same lights that go around. And you start to see a little bit of some art glass windows, which is what Wright really starts using in his prairie style of houses. And we'll see that in the next house we go to. So this sort of covers the Unity Temple. Any questions? Any other questions? You guys are already asking some nice questions. I appreciate that. Anything else?
Beautiful.
Didn't he use a lot of, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Teresa.
Didn't he use a lot of that prairie design in his different architectural?
Yeah. So when Wright first goes out on his own in the about 1897, 98, he does not build prairie style of houses. Depending on which historian you want to believe, architectural historian, in 1901 or 1902 is his first prairie style of house. And then he continues to build prairie style of houses all the way through to this one, which is the Robie House, which is next. This is his last prairie style of house. He builds this in 1910. And the reason why he stops building prairie style of houses is that he has these flat, very flat horizontal houses for the Midwest. And after he builds the Robie House, he moves to other parts of the country, and more importantly, designs houses for other parts of the country. And so he wants the outside of the house to match the environment or the landscape of where he is building those for. So this is completed in 1910. This is the Robie House. Now, I did tell you before that I'm not an architect or a historian, whatever, and that's true. But I will let you know that I do give tours of the Robie House. I've given hundreds of tours of the house, so you can pepper me with lots of questions on this house if you want. I should know. If I don't know the answer, it's a very good question. So let's go in this. So this is my main house, so to speak, in regards to my indoctrination with Frank Lloyd Wright. So again, the last prairie style of house. So this is a view from the outside. You can see it's very long, very horizontal. That's the key word about the prairie style of house, very horizontal. This one is magnified because it's a corner lot. So you can really see the horizontality of the house, because typically if you don't have a full view of the house, if it's on the middle of a block, you're only going to see the front of the house. So Nancy, you had a question?
Yeah, I have a weird question. What about snow laying on that roof? I mean, that's not typical for a northern roof line.
That's correct.
Yeah, what happens?
A couple things. So if you look up, if you look up here in the main part of the house, the roof is actually sloped somewhat, but you're right. All this roof up here in the front is flat. So we do get snow in Chicago. We're known to be cold and all those things, but we really don't get as much snow as a lot of people think. So it is able to withstand it. This house has been around since 1910. It went through some major restorations, and the roof has been resupported again, but that's after just over 100 years. So he was able to design it. There actually is hidden in through here all the way out to the front is some steel buried within this. So that's what really supports it. So that's one of the classic characteristics of a prairie style of house is cantilevering. So cantilevering basically means that one side, this front, appears to be unsupported. He likes to do that to play around and give some mystery to the house. But the way it is supported is with a big long steel beam on both sides of the house protecting it. So that's why it is able to withstand the snow that you're talking about, Nancy. Prairie style of houses have wraparound windows. So that you can see this is a 3-story house, even though it's relatively flat. Prairie style of houses do not have attics or basements. It's going to make the house taller, and he wants it to be flat. So what he ended up doing is he designs the prairie style of houses is that he basically the first floor obviously is an entrance area and has some other things, but some of the common characteristics in basements are on the first floor. That usually allows, whether it's a 2 or 3-story house, for them, therefore the second story, the main entertainment area, to be up higher, get some more light coming in, et cetera, et cetera. So that's we have on the Robie House from the outside. So we'll step inside. So this is the main living area. This is on the second floor. And this is the living room area, the classic, most photographed room in this particular house. So this sofa is actually not an original. Wright was also known for something called organic architecture, and basically organic architecture basically means that everything flows together. The outside of the house, the inside of the house, the furniture all flows together. So you can see this piece of furniture is very long, very flat, very horizontal. So the original is still around. It's at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. They're not giving it back to the Robie House. So the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust had an exact replica made, the same type of wood, all the same designs all throughout, but this is not the original sofa. So if you go to the Met and you see something like this, that is actually the original. So this is a replica. So I want to make sure we all understand that. But this row of windows, we'll show you another picture of in a minute, goes across the entire length of the house. You can see some more of the windows back here. There's 12 sets of windows running the entire length of the house. This is a stairwell from the first floor entryway area up to the top. And then this is the other view of this big long building. Again, you can see the windows off to the side. So this is from half of the room back the other way. This is the original table and chairs to the house, unlike the sofa. It's actually owned by the Smart Museum, which is a museum on the University of Chicago campus, and they have just repossessed this table just recently. And then so here's a view of a good up close view of those art glass windows that run the 12 sets of windows running the house. And you can see just outside on that, there's a privacy wall with a little bit of a porch. And in the summertime, there are plants and vines growing in this flower bed. Wright likes to what he calls commingle nature and the house. So a lot of his landscape is actually up in the house with urns and flower beds. And actually, some of you said you've been to his home and studio. As you know, there actually is a tree that grows through the center of the house that is still there, still live, still growing.
Philip, I wanted to ask you real quick, because did he have any knowledge of Charles McIntosh? Because these windows are so familiar to what McIntosh was doing at the same time.
Right. So those of you that may not be familiar with Melinda's question, Rennie McIntosh is Irish, I believe. Is that right, Melinda?
Glasgow, Scotland.
Scotland, right. He's from Scotland. So,
Glasgow.
Yeah. I have done a lot of research. So if you look at the Rennie McIntosh chairs, if you've seen any of his chairs, they look very familiar to the Wright chairs. I have searched the internet. I've spent 15, 20 hours trying to figure out. We know they're both from the arts and crafts style that comes from Richard Moore, I believe, is from the 1860s from England. But these high back chairs, I have been able to find absolutely nothing to know which one designed it first. And again, they're across the ocean, a long ways from each other. But I've even listened to a lecture from a professor at University of Glasgow that came to Chicago and compared the Robie House to one of the main houses. McIntosh really did mostly furniture, but he did build a couple of houses. And nowhere in her hour-long lecture does she talk about who was first. But they were both influenced by the arts and crafts style. And you're right, these chairs are very, very similar in style. And I cannot tell you who designed the first of these chairs. All of Wright's dining room tables that he designed for all his houses, they all have high back chairs. They're all different, all have different designs, but they all are high back from everyone that I've been able to see and everyone I've been able to discuss.
And the art glass is similar also.
Yes, yeah. But I cannot answer that question, but it's not for lack of trying to figure it out, Melinda.
Okay. I guess it's a matter of finding the dates, but
exactly.
But I think McIntosh might. I guess the question is how much interaction or how much understanding they had of what each was doing.
Yeah, that I don't know either. They did not have direct interactions. But they were aware of each other and their styles. Yes, there's a lecture that Wright gives here in Chicago, and he talks about the overall arts and crafts movement and how it evolves. So yes, they were aware of each other.
Okay.
That I can say. So there, and so this is the final picture. The Robies, excuse me, they have 2 young children when they move into this house. Mrs. Robie is very concerned about their safety. And so Wright did not invent the child gate, but it was a US patent was given to the child gate in 1906. So here, 4 years later, I can't say this is the first one, but obviously very early child gate. I think it's really great. You can see there's a little lock on it over here. It matches the same design and clearly a wonderfully built child gate. So I just like to close this portion of the Robie House, just showing again some of the unique styles that Wright and his team bring to houses. This house also has a 3-car attached garage, which is very unusual for 1910. That's because the Robies are big car enthusiasts. So a lot of interesting customizations to this house that the Robies asked for and Wright and his team designed.
How long did the family live in that home?
The family, I think you're all sitting down, it looks like. So the family lived in this house for less than a year.
Whoa.
It took a year to design the house and a year to build it. And then they lived there for less than a year. Basically, the Robies had what I would call a marital spat. And Mrs. Robie took the 2 children, moved back down to Springfield, Illinois, the state capital where the rest of her family was. And they never got back together. And then a few months later, Wright sells the house. So they lived in the house for just under a year. And then the next owners, I won't go too far because we had a lot of time. The next owners also lived in the house for only a year because the gentleman, who was a middle-aged gentleman, just suddenly, unexpectedly passed away. So you could think with that there might be some curse to the house, but the next family lived there for a long time. They lived there for 14 years. So there is no curse on the house, but that is an interesting thing. Usually I end my tours with that, talking about that the Robies only lived here for a year.
And is the Smart Museum with? You said the Smart Museum owned it.
No, the Smart Museum owns the dining room table. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Actually, the University of Chicago, this building, the Robie House, was donated to the University of Chicago in 1963. They own it, but the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust, they have a contract with. They are the ones that did all the restoration. This house has gone through about $12 million in restorations over the last 20 years in 3 major steps. The last one was completed in early 2019. It's what we're seeing now. It brings the house immediately to what it looked like the day that the Robies moved in.
And so that was funded by the Frank Lloyd Wright Association.
Right, they did it through they got grants and donations, etc. Yeah. All right, so next we're going to go to Taliesin. So we're up in Spring Green, Wisconsin, which is very close to Richland Center, where Wright was born. This is the area where his family is from. So Wright begins, as you can say in this one, I say he begins building this in 1911 because what we're looking at now, some people call Taliesin 3. So this house starts building in 1911, and then there is a arson set fire to this house in which Wright's mistress and her children all perish from this fire. It was set by a disgruntled servant. Wright was out of town at the time. So he immediately starts rebuilding this house after the fire of 1914. And then in 1925, the house catches fire again, this time not quite as chaotic. It's an electrical fire. So Wright then immediately again starts rebuilding the house. So this is actually the 3rd version of the house, so to speak. But it's all set on the same property. So Taliesin, it's a big, it's over 400 acres. Again, this is an area where his family is, Taliesin itself. And then later on, he develops the architectural school that some of you may have heard about. So he builds a lot of other structures on this building, and students come here. They live on the property itself, not in this main building. That's for Wright. But so there's a lot of different. There's about 12 other structures on the building. On the acreage itself.
Who was it that passed away at the first fire?
His mistress, his lady friend. They were not married.
Oh, okay.
They were both in the process of getting a divorce, and they had been living together for a couple of years. And she was the one that died in the fire.
She did, and her children?
And her children, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Basically, the disgruntled servant basically set the fire and then locked it so they couldn't get out the doors. So
Oh, wow.
rather bad situation. So again, taking a look at the main living area, you can see a lot of windows. Wright loves windows. Again, bringing nature in. As you can see, he does not have art glass windows in this house. It's not really a prairie style of house, but a gigantic main living area. And this is looking off one of the porches beyond the second porch, and then you can see the lake, the small lake that's also on the property. And this is what's overlooking. When you look out these windows here, you see the same lake. So it's a main view of the lake. And you can see, even though he does not have art glass windows, he has some design in the windows, as you can see on these windows where my cursor is. So he is playing a little bit with the windows, which he really does like to do. So we're going to get to Taliesin West in a little while, but which is built in the late 30s. But Wright basically lives in this house, is his primary residence, until he builds Taliesin West. Then he spends about 6 months of the year, the summer and the fall, mostly here at Taliesin, and then the winter and the early spring in Arizona at Taliesin West, which we'll see in a few minutes.
So he owned this house until when? And
Until he passed away, and even now, which also owns all his rights and all his trademarks and has all the designs he has. They actually own the house. So it passed on to his foundation, and they give tours of this house also. So far, the first three structures we've seen, the Unity Temple, the Robie House, and Taliesin, you can view all of these with tours. So next, we're going to go all the way out to California. This is within the city limits proper of Los Angeles. And he builds in 1921, he builds the Hollyhock House. So most of his houses, a lot of his houses are named after the original owner of the house. The original owner of this house was an oil heiress named Arlene Barnsdall. But she really liked, her favorite flower was the hollyhock. So you can see here, these are a couple of live hollyhocks over here on the corners of this flower bed. And what this is in concrete mold, Wright's interpretation of the hollyhock, and it goes all the way around the house. This being out in LA, completely different than the prairie style of house, and it has a courtyard. So even in the inside of the courtyard, as we'll see in a few minutes, the same design. So throughout the entire outside of the house, every outside wall has this hollyhock design. Miss Barnsdale and Mr. Wright did not get along. They were both doing a lot of traveling at the time, and Barnsdale was not very happy with the house and how it evolved. She actually, depending on who you believe, who you read, she either lived here for about 6 months or never lived in the house at all. Her initial intention was to build in a complete artist community around here. She owned the entire little hill this is on. It's called Olive Hill. And she was going to build some art studios, et cetera, down towards the base and have some artists be able to live there. But she actually fired Wright shortly before it was completed, and she hired 2 other architects to complete it, one being Lloyd Wright, who was one of Frank's sons. So again, it's in LA. So here's the inside courtyard. So again, you can see Wright's using some art glass windows here. This is the last house that he designs that is fully art glass windows. He decides that maybe the art glass windows are best for prairie style. So he slowly starts not using as much art glass in houses afterwards. A lot of his houses still have some art glass, but they were not what I would call a full array of art glass windows, and all the windows. He starts eliminating them after the Hollyhock House. So here's another, really from looking at the other end of the house, looking back in through the courtyard. So again, as we talked about, outside has the Hollyhock emblem, so does the inside. Obviously a big water feature here, made to look like a mini amphitheater. And so just another view from the outside, the opposite side of the house. So this is the living room. This is all original furniture. The city of Los Angeles owns it now. They do give tours. They've just completed a fairly major restoration of the house. The entire main floor has been restored. They still have some work to do up on the second floor where some of the bedrooms are. But Wright, likes to sort of play around. And this one, when you take the tour of this house, you are not allowed to take any pictures of the inside of it. And they're really strict on it. I was there a couple of years ago. We went out to LA for a wedding and I had to go see the house. But they have a docent who's giving the tour, which is great. But then they have 2 city employees standing right next to you as you go through the tour. You cannot sneak even an inside picture. So this is a stock picture off the internet. The reason why I say that is there's part of this you can't see, but Wright pays tribute to this living room with what he calls the 4 natural elements. So as we follow back all the way back to the Greeks and Romans, they considered fire, water, earth, and air, the 4 natural elements. And Wright's trying to pay a little tribute to them. So he puts all 4 of those elements in this room. You can see 3 of them fairly easy. So I'm going to have to guide you through the 4th one. So you can see the fire, obviously is pretty obvious to me in the fireplace. We'll skip water. The earth is the mantle is earthen material, and the air, comes through the skylights and the windows. But what is right here, just outside the fireplace, is a moat. It's about 3 feet deep and about 12 inches wide. And it gains its water all the way from this feature. Pipes run underneath the ground through the courtyard and then come up right about here where the fireplace starts. And there's this little moat that runs right in front of it. So that's where the water is for the 4 natural elements based on the Romans and the Greeks. So just as little play and tribute to them. Rather unusual, probably a little dangerous, but interesting to walk through it and see that.
What were her grounds of not liking the house?
She did not feel that it fit what she really wanted. It wasn't naturally livable for her. Now, she was a big, art fan, as we talked about, and actually, I don't have any inside pictures again, but on these hallways that are running through here, obviously windows on this side, but the other side is really all wall that would allow her to have a lot of art in there. There are some statues inside that Wright had placed at her request. So there is a lot there for her. She just didn't feel that the house was livable for the way she wanted it to. And from reading some about it, a lot of it seemed to do that they were both doing a lot of traveling and never really talked to each other directly. And they just never really fit or had an in sync view of where she wanted this thing to end. So next is Fallingwater. That's the one that most of you, if you don't know too much about Wright, you know about Fallingwater. I used to say probably the most famous private structure in the United States, or private home, but I take out the probably now. Clearly, I think it is. So this is 1938. So Wright's already in his 60s now when he builds and designs and build this. And, after this house is built, he's on the cover of Time magazine. He really becomes, what I think, we didn't use those terms back then, but now what we would call the star architect, sort of like the IMPI is now or was, and a couple of others that have that national or international reputation. And this really pole vaults Wright to that same place. So Fallingwater is a couple you mentioned from Pittsburgh. It's just a little southeast of Pittsburgh. I think about a 45-minute car ride from Pittsburgh. This is on the edge of a state park. This house is designed by the Kaufmans. So the Kaufmans own the major department store in Pittsburgh, and they owned this property for quite some time. And they had some barrack-like buildings where they would use when they would come out to this Fallingwater area. And they would actually allow some of their salespeople, especially the unmarried females, to come out and enjoy a week or two here. As that dormitory building starts to deteriorate further, their son gains some interest in architecture and actually goes and apprentices with Wright for a year at his school without the intent to ever be a long-term architect. But he then hooks up his parents with Wright, and the Kaufman's design was to have the house down here to look at the waterfall, and that was their intention. So Wright comes out and does his site design. And then, as we all now famously know, he builds the house literally over, into and over the waterfall. So when Edgar Kaufman first sees this design, the literature I've read says he really didn't like it. He wasn't sure if he was going to like it, but he and his wife sat through it, looked at it, thought about it for a while, and decided to go ahead with that and allow Wright to build it as he originally designs it. And this house is really cantilevered throughout. We talked about the cantilevering on the front of the Robie House. So really, this house is, you can see, it's, water's running underneath it. It really has, in the center of it is the main support of the building. And all these porches and all these rooms come off of it and are supported by this main structure here. And so that's what really cantilevering is, again, as you can see, and you can see a pretty good view of that from this picture here. So this is the inside main living room area of Fallingwater. I think what's most interesting about this, if you look over towards the right screen and where my cursor is now, you can see two rocks. These are actually natural rocks that come all the way up from the ground, are close to this support structure of it. Wright's initial intention was to level these off to the floor and just put in the stone floor like he does everywhere else. Mrs. a major enjoyer of the sun, and apparently sun meaning S-U-N, not her son. I don't want to get any bad things. And this rock she used to love to sunbathe on. So when they're seeing the design and the house is being built, they asked Wright to not shave this off, and they want to have this rock here. So it's close to the fireplace, so it's not really too much in the way. So Wright acquiesces to their request, and so this is actually natural rock, these two pieces of natural rock. And so as you can see, Wright does really have the floor polished, has some lights up above. So it's almost like, since so polished, it's almost like this is water, and the waters are running by the rock as it is downstairs from what we saw in natural light. And then you can see the big windows throughout. Again, we talked about Wright has a lot. He likes to enjoy nature through the house, through the windows. So some big windows here. Wright loves built-in furniture in his entire career. So you can see sofas are built into the house from here. And then I love this picture. Again, when I went to Fallingwater quite some time ago, and you could not take pictures of the inside. So this is a stock one, but I do remember this particular area. A gentleman took this class about a month ago and told me now that you can, if you take a special tour, you can take photos, your own interior photos. But I just love how you can see up here how the corner of the windows, when you open them up, disappear. So again, Wright just wanting to have a little play and being able to see nature, and again, without any kind of casements handling there, so you get a big open view of the windows when they're open.
Phil, did I understand you correct that those two rocks literally came through the floor? That's not, they didn't cut them off and bring them in. They literally.
Correct.
I thought I understood you that way.
Yeah, I know. It is amazing. Yeah, I didn't know that when I toured it, but doing research since then, I found that out. Yep. So this is back. We're in the main living room area, just off the main living room. So here's a walkway down to the water. Again, we talked about Mrs. Kaufman being a sunbather and the swimmer. She really likes the water. So you're able to go from the living room straight down to the water. You can see there's a little slide here and the guide rails here. So you can close this off, and here are some gates to protect it. But literally, this is just off the living room. You can go all the way down to the water. This is looking at the same stairwell now from the opposite end of it, from looking at it from a porch. But you can see, so it feeds right down to the water. So you literally could just go right from the living room down and take a dip in the water and play in and among the waterfall back when the Kaufmans owned it.
How long did they own it?
I don't remember the exact year. They owned it till they passed away. Then their son inherited it, and he was an only child and did not have any children. And don't quote me on this. I sometimes have my notes here in front of me. I don't today, but I think in the late 50s or early 60s, the Fallingwater Conservatory becomes the owner of the house, and they're the ones that run tours of the house and manage it still to this day. But they owned it until basically they were not living anymore. Any other questions on Fallingwater? Anybody want to add anything? I had 2 or 3 of you told me you were there. Anybody want to add anything that I didn't talk about that you thought was interesting from when you toured it? All right. So next we'll go out to Arizona. So it's Scottsdale, Arizona, the Taliesin West. So we talked about Taliesin, the right where he lived. So in 1937, he builds Taliesin West. A little bit warmer out there in Arizona than it is in Wisconsin in the wintertime. And so literally we talked about he had an architectural school with students. They would literally, the entire group of students would load up and move between Scottsdale and Spring Green. So they would move back and forth twice a year, go from Wisconsin out to Arizona. Sort of like, I guess, in a caravan. I don't know exactly how it went, but they would all move. So Taliesin West is built as a residence, but it is built after he has started the architectural school. So there's a lot of big open spaces for students to eat in. There are 2 amphitheaters from what I've been told. There's a couple of buildings I physically have not been to that we're touring. This is one of those. So if anybody is, I know one of you mentioned you had been to Taliesin West. If you want to add anything, please do. My experience is solely from reading and from pictures. I have not set foot on this property yet. Outside of, oops, sorry. And then here's a picture of that inside. Like I said, a big area. This is, I think, where students could eat and gather after in the evening hours and have some entertainment. My understanding is you can actually sit in these chairs. A lot of them you can't, and they are, from what people have told me, they're just as uncomfortable as they look, which was one of Wright's characteristics. So I don't know. I don't remember which one. Somebody said they've been to Taliesin West. Anything you want to add?
No.
Okay, so another view of it. So this is just before sunset. And you can see we're out in the desert, but this apparently Wright was able to figure out that there was an aquifer below ground and he's able to funnel up and get water here. So this is, even though we're out in the desert, this is natural to the environment. So it's not water that's trucked in or anything along those lines. It is part of it. And my understanding, a couple of people have been there and some other classes say this is a classic, beautiful view shortly before sunset and how it looks. So Scottsdale, Arizona, Taliesin West. So if you remember that very first slide, we say that Wright passes away in Arizona. He was, it was in April. So he was still out in Scottsdale where he had the surgery and where he passed away. So he was in early April, was still not headed back to Wisconsin because it's still cold here in April and May in this area. So now we're going to go back to Madison, or back to Wisconsin more specifically, and we're going to go to Madison. So this is called the Jacob House. This is Wright's first Usonian house. Usonian is an acronym for United States of North America. So Mr. Jacob is a personal friend of Mr. Wright's, and he challenges him to build a house for the common man, so to speak, for less than $5,000 in 1930, mid-1930 prices. So Wright comes up with this and he calls it the Usonian house. He ends up designing and building over 100 of them throughout the United States. A lot of them are actually concentrated in New York, upstate New York, and some in New England, but they're scattered throughout the country. So some of the characteristics of Usonian houses, there's a lot of glass and rock in there. Usually the front is very plain to save some money. So what we're looking at now is from the backyard into the back view. So Wright really makes the family the center of this house and gives them the view into the backyard and where he spends all his money, so to speak, in the house. So to confirm that, this is the front of the same house. This is the front of it. So you can see pretty plain right off on the street and really just all wood. So he's really pushing everything to the back and the backyard so the family can enjoy it. So this is this room we saw here in this picture. This is that same room here. Again, even though it's a cheaper house, he still loves that built-in furniture, big, lengthily across the entire wall, built-in bookcase, feeds into a built-in desk here. And you can see a lot of natural light, also some lights up above. So it is bringing a lot of light in. These houses also had radiant floor heating to heat them if they were in an area that needed heat. And then you can see this is a lot different than the Robie dining room table, a little more plain, not as ornate. Again, the furniture is included in this $5,000 cost. So you can see the wood's unfinished as opposed to at Robie House, a lot different. And then the Usonian houses have a carport. So Wright did not invent the concept of the carport, but he did invent the term carport. So he was the one that sort of named this type of structure. Again, we're starting to talk about in the 1930s and 1940s. It's a lot more common to have a car. So we do have a carport, and almost all the Usonian houses have a carport unless the client didn't ask for it.
How did you spell that? Usonian?
It's UN.
U.S.
United States.
Oh.
North America, Usonian. There's an extra I in there that doesn't fit to anything. So it's USONIA, N at the end, but it's an acronym for United States of North America.
Okay, with an I thrown in.
Yeah, and somebody mentioned about they had not been to Kentucky Knob, which is very close to Fallingwater. That is actually a Usonian house too, by definition. It's a Usonian house. So if you go see that, that's another one of those. About 30 or 40 that were built. So this takes us all the way to the end of Wright's career. Like I say, he dies in 1959 in April. In October of 1959, the Guggenheim Museum is officially opened. It was mostly built, the exterior was mostly built when Wright passes away. There's actually a pretty famous picture of him standing on top of this, looking down. So the finishing on the outside hadn't been done, but the physical structure had. So again, very unusual, a lot taller than all the other buildings we've seen. We're in New York City. We're right across from Central Park. Obviously, land prices are a lot more expensive, so he needs to go up in regards to this. As the structure is being built, there's a lot of criticism from artists and architectural critics. This is just not going to work. This reverse going up. There's not good place. Artists said there's no good place to put pictures because there's no flat walls. There's not enough light in there. And he was really being panned as this was built. John has put in the correct spelling of Usonian for everyone in there, so we have it. So thanks so much for that. And then here's some pictures of the inside of the Usonian. Of the Guggenheim Museum. So you can see it is fairly airy and light on the inside with a big main atrium and big skylights up on top. And then here's another view without people in it of that lobby area. So after it's built, it actually receives, even though Wright is now dead, of course, it does receive a lot of critical acclaim. And artists back off from saying this isn't a good place to have to show off their art. And the architectural critics also, most of them really like it. So that ends our tour of the different structures, the 8 structures. I hope you enjoyed it. And I see we're close to being tight on time. I have a couple more slides and I'll open it up for some questions, just some closing slides. But if you do need to go, I definitely appreciate you being on and much appreciate it. For those of you, most of you know, Get Set Up has lots of other classes. John was nice enough to put some of my other classes in here. But we have lots of classes, hundreds of different classes that you might be interested in. And you will get some class notes from me. Most of you know they're from Get Set Up, but I will put them together. And one thing of interest that I haven't talked about, there is another thing called the Frank Lloyd Wright Conservatory. And I will give you the link to their main webpage. The reason I bring it up is they have listed as one of their links, they list by state every structure that Frank Lloyd Wright ever designed that's still standing. They tell you exactly where it is within that state. They tell you if it can be visited by a tour. They can tell you if it's a bed and breakfast. Some of these places you can actually stay in. They're houses that people have now as an Airbnb or as a formal bed and breakfast. So it's just a great list. If you're like me and I'm going to travel someplace, I go to see if there's any Wright structures close by that I can look at, and hopefully my wife will bear with me and allow me to go see one or two of them. when we're out somewhere, but it's rather interesting. So I will give you that link to that tab also. And then finally, go ahead.
I was just going to say, one interesting thing is, I don't know if it's on that list, but in Nashville, Tennessee, actually up on the same hill my dad lived, a man bought a set of Fallingwater-like plans and built a Fallingwater house himself. It was completely circular, which meant it inside didn't have any straight walls, but he built it all out of stone, built it himself, but it was a Fallingwater Wright house. But
yeah,
it's not probably not part of the conservatory though. But
yes, and
it's
he
an
did
interesting.
actually build it, but there are some other houses like that. And, probably his first, I think, and most famous sort of round house he builds for his son, Lloyd Wright, the same one we referenced before out in Arizona. And that one gets a lot of press also as being a house that's completely circular, like you say. So that's one of those changes he made, from the prairie style. He does have numerous circular houses, like say out in California, courtyards. You can tell when you see a Wright house, the design, it's his, but they do not all look the same. Exactly.
Like this one was sort of built out of stone the way you would expect it to be.
Yep.
Okay.
You also will get a chance to fill out a little survey. And if you have a couple minutes to do it, that would be great. I love lots of stars, but I really want your honesty. And I really want 2 or 3 sentences of feedback. Did I spend too much time one place, not enough? I try to change the classes and adapt them based on your feedback. I'm here to help you enjoy it. So I definitely like some feedback. Relatively new feature now. When you join a class, you can invite a friend. Pretty easy, whether you're on mobile or desktop, to invite a friend. So please use that. Friends, neighbor, relative, you think they might be interested. They can maybe do the first class with you, and then hopefully they'll explore other classes on their own. So please get some friends involved. And then again, we talked about this address at the beginning. Get set up. If you have suggestions for other classes, you want to be a sort of like a co-host and talk about something that's of interest to you. Somebody like me can help you out, so you don't have to do the behind the scenes things, and you can just share your interest with somebody for once or twice. And again, this is where you can request the recording. So that is it. You guys have done a wonderful job of asking questions as we go, but if you have any closing questions, I will try to answer them now, or if you have any some quick comments. And I know we're right at the hour, so if you need to go, thanks so much for joining, and we'll stay on for a few more minutes as if we have any more questions.
I really enjoyed it, Phil.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I
Hi,
did. Thank you.
Philip, there's a question in the chat from Kat.
Okay.
How much contact did Wright have with his granddaughter, the Oscar winner, on how many of his descendants became architects or artists of some stripe?
Yeah. So I'm only aware of his son, Lloyd Wright. He actually was first a landscape architect, and then became a house structural architect also. So he did both of those things. As far as Anne Bancroft, that's where my wife comes in. I know she said she's a big in the movies, and I was not that. And she was the one, when we go up to Taliesin, there is a little grave site, or grave area within the Taliesin, just outside of Taliesin, a small little church. It's not on his property. And Anne Bancroft is her tombstone is there too. What? It's Ann Baxter. My wife is in the back. My wife can hear me. So it's actually Ann Baxter. And so she is there. As far as how much interaction the two of them had, I don't know. If you go to the home and studio, one of the pieces of furniture is a family heirloom of a rocking bed. And what the docents say there, that was used for Anne when she was a child, was also used for Wright and his siblings when they were growing up. So there is that connection. But how much they actually interacted with each other, I will have to check into. That's a good fair question. I don't know the answer to that. So the next time I get asked it, I'll be able to.
But it's Ann Baxter, not Anne Bancroft, right?
According to my boss, meaning my wife, yes. And she's the big movie person, so I'm not going to argue with her. So great question though. So anything else? And thanks, John, for catching that. All right, well, I will stay on for another second or so. I'm going to close out of the screen, but if you have any other questions as we go, please let me know. And again, thanks so much for joining us.
Have you considered doing any other classes on other architects?
I just started one. It's not about a specific architect. It's about a small town called Columbus, Indiana. And it actually is pretty famous for its architects. There's a lot of major architects there. So I've given that class now 2 or 3 times, just sort of started it. And I'm thinking about some others that I may do. But yeah, so right now the other one we have, it's called the Surprising Architecture of Columbus, Indiana.
Okay.
I'm sorry, it's called Architectural Surprises of Columbus, Indiana.
I don't know how much, since you've already kind of scratched the surface with them, but Charles Rennie Mackintosh is really fascinating. And I guess he designed the art school there in Glasgow, and it burned, it's burned twice in the last 10 years.
Oh, I did not know that. Yeah.
And it's considered one of the greatest pieces of English art, of British architecture.
Okay.
And it's such a natural treasure that they completely rebuilt it, and no sooner, right before the opening, and because they were so accurate in the reconstruction of it, there were no fire, and it burned again, and this time almost beyond. It's just ashes. So
I did not know that. I'll have to do some more research.
yeah, look into it. But it's really fascinating life, and then it ties so much with what Wright was doing.
Yeah. So I'm thinking when it gets a little bit warmer here, I'm going to maybe meander around downtown Chicago, and I love Art Deco too. There's a lot of Art Deco buildings, so I'll see if I can generate a tour on that. But it'll take me a couple months to get some good photos, etc. So I'm thinking of some of the things. So
Chicago is a living history of American architecture.
Yeah, exactly.
No better city than for that.
Yep. So
that'd be a great class.
Okay, I'll work on that this summer and see if I can't get it going after I get some. It's sort of, you got to try to get some theme to put everything together. So I'll work on that. So, but thank you all very much. Any other questions before we go? All right. Hope to see you in some other classes. I attend some classes and lead some also, the guide. So I'll see you at one end of the camera or the other. And thanks so much. And I appreciate you all being so engaged and asking questions as we go.
Nice meeting you, Philip.
Same here, Melinda. Take care. Bye, Nancy. Sorry.